And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Becky Steckler, and I am the Program Director for the Urbanism Next Center at the University of Oregon. I am thrilled that you could join us today and hear about our webinar and hear from our exciting guests about where the sidewalk ends, really thinking about the curb management of commercial delivery. I'll let our moderator actually introduce our speakers today, but we are joined by Alexandra Gomez, and she is with the American Planning Association and will be our moderator. The American Planning Association is just one of the partners that we work with on our this webinar series, and actually it's also has been part of our Urbanism Next, a virtual forum that we coordinate with our partners, the American Planning Association, both at the national and the state level in Oregon, with the American Institute of Architects at the national and state level, the Urban Land Institute at both the national and state level, and the American Society of Landscape Architects Oregon, as well as with NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance. So just thank you to all of those partners, as well as our sponsors, NUMO, Uber, Knight Foundation, Tool Design, Perkins & Will, Lyft, Echo Northwest, the Oregon Department of Transportation Growth Management Program, Kittleson and Associates, Ankrum Moyson, Mithun, Alta, Fair and Peers, Parametrics, and Arup. Thank you all. And with that, just a quick reminder to everyone who is listening today, if you do have questions, go ahead and put it into the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I will hand it over to Alexandra.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Becky. Like Becky mentioned, my name is Alex, and I'm a research associate at the American Planning Association. I'm super excited to moderate the conversation today between our three wonderful panelists, and I'm especially excited to hear questions from the audience. So the curb is a pivotal piece of infrastructure in our cities. We needed to demarcate space for activities, but it's also a transitional zone that should accommodate all types of movements and flows, from sidewalk users to road users. We can't have complete and accessible streets without it. During the pandemic, curbside pickup has shaken up the retail world. And on top of that, demand has grown for pedestrianized streets, space for physical distancing, and even space for social movements and civic participation. Now urbanists need to consider how the curb can hold this new weight on its shoulders. Our three speakers, Matthew Warfield, Mitch Osir, and Dawn Miller, will discuss some of the tools urbanists are using to address these issues. Matthew Warfield is a new mobility planner for the Boston Department of Transportation. He works on programs that help the city meet its ambitious mode shift and carbon neutrality goals. His work has included increasing access to shared mobility vehicles, preparing for electric vehicles, and implementing a mobility hub. He will be speaking more about using data to inform curb management strategies and curb-related decisions. Then Mitch Osir, who has been director of parking and downtown services in Aspen, Colorado, going on 7 years now, will speak. As a local business owner, he understands that supporting the local economy comes with facilitating deliveries, as well as accommodating the tourism industry by providing affordable parking for our out-of-town visitors. He will be speaking on how Aspen has used data, technology, and pricing to manage curb demand. He will also be joined by Dawn Miller, who is VP for Policy and Partnerships at Coord. She focuses on Coord's work with public agencies and has years of experience under her belt in the taxi, car service, and ride-hailing industry. As former chief of staff for the Taxi and Limousine Commission in New York City, she launched the commission's research and evaluation practice. So thank you to all our panelists for being willing to share their experience and insight with our audience. We hope this webinar can lead to a deeper understanding of the growing value of the curb and how urbanists can manage it moving forward. Thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thanks so much. Can everyone see my screen okay? So As I said, I'm Matt Warfield with the City of Boston. I am the new mobility planner in the transportation department. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here in the City of Boston, looking at curb management and curb demand. So one thing that's a lot of cities have faced, particularly in recent years, though, of course, COVID has changed a lot of this demand, which I'll talk a little bit about. But the growth of TNCs, Uber and Lyft, has exploded here in Boston. Year after year, continued growth and demand on that, which has put specific demands on the curb in terms of pedestrian access, pickup, drop off, and just congestion in general on the streets. On-demand delivery, even before COVID, this was increasing, and particularly during this time, it's grown even more. More people, more stuff. Boston, fortunately, is a city that continues to grow. Year after year, the population is projected to grow as and more people moving into the city means more demand for not only space but also for items and goods. And then within all of that, there is enforcement. You can stick any sign you want up on the curb, or you can try to have any regulation you want at the curb. But if the rules aren't being followed, or if there is not some sort of incentive to follow those rules, such as enforcement, it doesn't necessarily make a difference. So within the city of Boston, we have some challenges around enforcement, that it's difficult to enforce time limited regulations. Metering tends to be the easiest. And, as I'll talk about, ticketing is not necessarily a deterrent. So looking at the different demands for short-term commercial demand, it breaks down quite a bit. So we're not just talking about the standard delivery to a restaurant or something. There's many different pieces of commercial within that. So parcel delivery, the smaller UPS, Fedex, and Amazon now on demand. All of the food deliveries, the grocery deliveries, the beverage deliveries, the food bev companies, which are more the traditional Cisco, CVS, using the larger vehicles to come into the city. As I mentioned, the TNCs, passenger pickup drop off. Contractors and trades, that's a big one here in Boston with so much work and new development taking place. There's a lot of contractors and trades that end up on our streets. And by definition, they're considered a commercial vehicle, so they have the same access. And then private vehicles. These can mimic the behavior of any of these types of vehicles. And while they're not considered commercial, they oftentimes try to act in the same manner. And so thinking about our curbs, we have multimodal priorities here in the city of Boston. We are trying to shift people out of single occupancy vehicles, and we're making it easier and safer for folks to get around the city by bike, by walking, and by public transit. And so these are some recent changes we made. Some of these were temporary, but have since been made permanent during COVID. And that's one thing that the reduced population in the city from tourism, from university students, and just downtown office workers allowed us to do a lot of this work that would have otherwise been challenging given the level of traffic. So our curbs are becoming less accessible. And it's intentional because we want that multimodal access. And temporary programs we had in place during COVID our food takeout zones, the outdoor dining. We had extended food truck program to provide access in neighborhoods. All of that's going to become permanent. Most of it's going to become permanent, or at least happening year round. And so again, a reduction of curb space. And the way that we understand commercial demand is that essentially it's fixed demand. So there's things you can do to get people out of single occupancy cars, increasing safety, increasing incentives, just having better services. But in terms of commercial traffic, it's difficult to really change that because the demand is driven by consumer choice. And especially with on-demand culture and people wanting things quickly, it just means more and more vehicles and more deliveries. Commercial demand is very highly localized. I think that particularly with the on-demand deliveries and the small parcel deliveries, they want to get right in front of the place where they're delivering. So it's not enough to have, say, a loading zone at the beginning of the block. They would rather stop right in front of that business or that house or that residence and just run in quickly and run back out. And then enforcement, again, is a big challenge. due to that need and the time sensitive, the need to make that quick transaction, enforcement doesn't always change the behavior. Tickets, a lot of these companies are enrolled in the City of Boston's fleet program, which essentially means they receive a monthly bill to pay all of their tickets. And you'll see that this is a breakdown of what was paid in 2018 by the different companies. Or it's the bill is passed on through the services. So if you're a contractor, you're going to pass that cost on to the person who's hired you, or if you're a delivery driver, things like that. And so what this map does is we looked at ticket data, which of course ticket data is not perfect because can be skewed in so many ways of areas that are targeted more than others. An enforcement officer might want to be more ticket heavy than another, might give some leeway. But what this ticket data shows is that, so the red areas are commercial vehicles that received double parking tickets. And so the purple areas are loading zones where tickets for passenger vehicles parking in them. And then the black areas are loading zones where tickets were issued for commercial vehicles overstaying the time limit. And so this was taken to basically say, all right, the double parking is showing us that those are areas where there's demand for commercial access to the curb that could potentially use some additional space. The purple is where we're saying it's underutilized since it's not being utilized by a commercial vehicle. Passenger vehicles are able to park there. And the black is saying it's overutilized, that since a vehicle got ticketed beyond the time limit, that there needs to be additional space. The interesting thing is that where there's the black and purple highlighting, there's not a lot of red. So there is something telling us that the loading in those areas is somewhat adequate in that vehicles aren't having to double park to meet their loading demands. And a lot of the red areas, though, are residential areas. It's high density residential areas that do not typically have commercial loading zones because it's not a commercial area. So it presents a different challenge to us. So thinking about, we could try to approach loading zones in a different way. We can try to sign them differently. We could meter commercial loading zones. Right now, as I mentioned before, we have one type of commercial loading zone. It's a commercial loading zone, and pretty much any vehicle that meets the description, which is having a logo on the side, having some sort of commercial entity, can park in those spaces. So there's something to be said about perhaps refining our loading zone approach, but we see the future going and needing to right-size vehicles that are coming into the city. There's been many other cities that have tried this approach, but we recently did an RFI about e-cargo bike delivery solutions, and we got back about 12 different responses. And so we're moving forward this year with doing a pilot program that we're working on over the next 5 months and will be implemented later this year. And we're looking at two different ways that we could approach it. We could do a downtown business improvement district approach. We're working with the larger delivery companies like a UPS or a Fedex or an Amazon, and really looking at ways that we can decrease the number of vehicles that are coming in to the city. There's unfortunately a lot of storefronts that are becoming vacant downtown. Those could potentially become places where packages are delivered to and then parsed out through e-cargo bikes. We did do some ride-alongs with UPS, and 3 of us went on 3 different routes. And funny enough, we all ended up a few blocks from each other and just parked there the entire day because UPS gets their stuff from their warehouse, brings their truck to downtown, and then parks there for 5-6 hours while they deliver up into buildings. So there's a different model that can be used down there. The other approach we're considering is looking at more of working with Main Streets organizations, more community partners to deploy and operate a shared fleet. So it'd be something that we'd either try to find a third-party operator or something that we might try to manage as a city or through a Main Street organization, where we're giving access to cargo bikes to gig workers, to local communities, to someone who can go down to the grocery store to pick up their goods, and rather than hop in their car, they could do an e-cargo bike. Each one has a different approach we'd have to look at, but that's something we're going into. We think that the opportunities and the motivation for them exist, that where this can meet the demand. the small light shipments can easily be moved through cargo bikes. The time critical shipments, you can easily get around the city when it's high congested in traffic. Some of the things we're thinking about is loading zones. You have 40 to 60 feet of space on the curb, and that could be taken up by 1 or 2 vehicles blocked. With the lighter electric vehicles or cargo bikes, many more can fit into one space. In areas where it's potential, we can have them park on the sidewalk. So basically it becomes a quicker, easier access movement of goods. We have demonstrated this ourselves, so we can't ask to do something without us doing it first. So our mayor's office of new mechanics purchased a cargo trike. We have a fleet hub program in the city that are vehicles available for employees to rent out for short-term access, work access to around the city. So this electric trike was purchased and added to that fleet hub process, with essentially looking at the questions of would employees use the trike rather than a car or truck, and how does the city residents respond? Unfortunately, this happened, it was planned before COVID, but it has happened during COVID. So the utilization rate's been fairly low because we're all working from home. But it's something that, has worked. It's good for meetings, those community meetings, good for, Boston's not a huge footprint. So it's a city you can easily get around to different neighborhoods. But it's something we're continuing to do, and we want to see this expand to other commercial delivery in the city. So that's all I have. I appreciate you taking the time. That's my contact info, and I'm happy to answer questions a little bit later.
Great, thank you, Matt. That was awesome. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. Thanks Alex and Becky for having us. And curb management is of course a really broad topic. And today Mitch and I are going to focus on some real on the ground work that we've been doing together to tackle one important segment, which is the loading and unloading of goods. So as Matt was talking about, our streets and curbs have been getting busier and more chaotic for a long time. A greater variety of modes are trying to use them. And one big segment we all know is growing is deliveries. There's a projected 17% annual growth rate in e-commerce, which is a pre-COVID stat. So we can only imagine how COVID has accelerated this trend. And this is causing all sorts of challenges on city streets. Delivery vehicles either don't have a place to safely and legally load, don't know where that space is, or choose not to use the space that's available. We see blocked crosswalks and ADA ramps, like this example here. We see double parking that blocks vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists, creating really dangerous situations for people to maneuver around with limited visibility. We see our highest priority modes like buses slowed down or blocked by improperly loading vehicles. Bike lanes are blocked and cyclists need to navigate into vehicle lanes instead of using the spaces created for them. And my personal least favorite is this one. So this truck is loading into the crosswalk and blocking an entire travel lane. So anyone traveling in the same direction as the truck is likely going to block the crosswalk and then to pass the truck nose into oncoming traffic. And this isn't good for fleets either. They waste precious time looking for space to pull over. They also pay a lot of money in fines in some location. And unlike fees, they're not tax deductible. And all of this uses unnecessary fuel and creates unnecessary emissions. So one way cities are trying to improve the situation is with curb management programs. And one example is smart zones. So smart zones are spaces along the curb that cities digitally manage and operate. Drivers use a mobile app to see real-time smart zone locations and availability. The goal here is to provide these drivers with the incentives and information they need when they need it to navigate directly to an available smart zone near their destination. And so you can see here that cities identify these zones using metal signage, saying the days and hours when the zone must be booked using an app and providing a way for the public to learn more or to download the app. And this sort of program gives cities a powerful set of management tools they can use to shift loading to safe and legal locations. So for example, when you have drivers booking space, you learn a whole lot about when and where you need more or less of it. These data are continuously updated by bookings, so you can make changes as needs change. When you're charging for space, you incentivize people to use it more efficiently, so only staying on this prime real estate as long as they need to. You can also use pricing to shift some loading activity to times of days when it's less problematic, such as maybe the early mornings or late nights. And you can try things like premium and less premium space, charging more for the most coveted spaces while charging less for secondary locations, spreading demand around a bit geographically. So curb management programs and technology enable cities to manage a transition that's underway. So for a long time, a lot of downtown space was dedicated to individual parking. Often this is metered parking, like you see on the bottom curb on this slide. And we think more curbs should look like the top curb. It's serving a more diverse set of users. It's also probably serving an overall greater number of people than the bottom curb. And if cities are charging for some of these different uses, they can make this transition without sacrificing the parking revenue that they might rely on. And so just to give you a quick look at what all of this type of program looks like for a driver uses an app to find locations and real-time availability of loading space. He can enter his destination and set off on his way with the system automatically holding the available space nearest his destination for him when he's about 10 minutes away. The driver is routed directly to the available space. When he arrives, he hits a button to check in and is on his way. Of course, enforcement is a piece of this. So sensors and cameras and all sorts of like wiring doohickeys are not required to run this sort of program. It also doesn't need to assume a wholesale reinvention of the way cities do parking enforcement. But officers do need to know who has and hasn't booked the zone. So there's an app that an officer uses to take a picture of the license plate of each vehicle in the zone so he can see if a vehicle booked the space or not. Officers also get live alerts if there's a problem reported in the zone. And we've actually been really happy to hear that this license plate recognition or LPR technology has been working really well for the officers when some previous attempts have not worked quite as well. And of course, the city team who's running the program needs to know what's going on. So they can use a dashboard to analyze what's going on with their curbs, change or add regulations and pricing, turn a zone off for a special event, and all of that stuff. So this is all new technology and programming, and we're learning every day. We're really happy that this program is live in 4 US cities. We've had a really fabulous experience working with Mitch and his team in Aspen, Colorado. So now I'll turn things over to Mitch to kind of go into a case study about how his team has been doing with this program in Aspen.
Thanks, Dawn. That was a great presentation, and thank you, Matt, also. Again, I'm Mitch Ozier, the Director of Parking and Downtown Services for the City of Aspen. And we got together with Coord and started putting a plan together to try to manage the curb space. Just quickly before we start, Aspen is a relatively small town, but we have 16 square blocks in our downtown. And out of that, in a non-COVID year, we almost do $1 billion, that's with a B, worth of retail and restaurant business. So that's quite a bit. When I got here 7 years ago, over 30%, over 70% in the downtown core were employees of businesses, as is in most cities. So the first thing I did was to start to raise prices and increased them by over 50%. When I did that, of course, the businesses in town said I was going to kill their business. Just so people are aware, I had over 40 years experience in the retail world. So I come to parking with a totally different perspective. And I told them, give me a chance, give me a 4-month test. And if your sales don't go up, then it's a failure. 4 months later, the majority of the businesses called me and said, we hate you. And I said, why is that? Because you were successful, your plan worked. And since then, we've continued to raise prices in town. Part of that became now working with Dawn and Coord and try to figure out how we can manage the curb space. Next slide, Dawn. So we put a plan together, tried to decide where we would do this. We did decide to make these loading zones active loading and loading. We had a big discussion of whether we should make them commercial vehicles only. We did not. Similar to what Matt said, I think that turned out to be a mistake. And moving forward, we will make these majority of these commercial loading zones only. It turned out we did choose our 6 busiest loading zones. Those are in green on this map. They are our 6 biggest. In the end, I think that was the right choice because it gave us great data and a lot of people using the zones right away. In addition, we did convince Coord to manage 2 alleyways in this process because alleyways are actually worse for us than our loading zones. And those are in blue in this screen here. And we've had great luck doing that. All of our loading zones are 7 a.m. until 6 p.m., except we had one that was from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. We did decide to charge for this because we wanted to get some value to it. Plus, I wanted to make sure that these truckers had a reason to sign in and out so I could get the data. We decided to go relatively inexpensive, 50 cents for 15 minutes, $1 for 30 minutes, and $2 for an hour. So nothing that was going to break the bank. As far as the rollout was concerned, we did have a project team, myself, who is the director. I had Blake, who is my operations manager, and then we decided to include one of my officers in all of this communication as we got going at the beginning. In the end, including the officer was a great success because he's on the boots on the ground all the time and is in the position to really make sure that what I was thinking was correct. And then we had 3 people from the Coord team to help us pull things together. And that was very helpful and very successful as we talked back and forth. Our timeline was 3 months worth of planning, and we needed every single minute of those 3 months. We were not overloaded. We thought 3 months to ourselves was going to be too much at the beginning, but again, in the end, I needed all of that. And then we also did a 3-month pilot at the beginning with Coord, went from November 1st through the end of January. And we decided to do that because November was relatively slow. December is obviously a huge month for us. And then January is busy. That actually ended up working well with November being a little slower month, got us a chance to get our feet underneath us so we knew what was going on. Since then, we have decided to extend the program with Coord, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Outreach was very important. We spent a long time communicating to these truckers in advance to make sure there was no surprises. Stakeholder engagement was key, very important to reach out to my city council, our Chamber of Commerce, and as many different people as I could to make sure there's no surprises. We had a lot of PR in the newspapers, which helped get the message out. In addition, Coord did video footage in advance. We worked with a consulting company. So in advance, we did 3 of the zones. We videotaped a month before we started so we could see whether or not things got better or not. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then signing up fleets was obviously key because we needed the fleets to be part of the program. So what happened? So this is data from January 24th. Things have gotten better since then quite a bit. We did have 34 fleets up, which signed up, which was above our expectation. We're now almost up to 40 fleets, and we are getting fleets almost every day. 118 drivers signed up. So a fleet signs up, and then they line up individual drivers. We had 118 of them sign up. 53% of them did work for a fleet. 77% of those booked at least once so far, and over 63% of them have booked 2 times or more. In addition, we have over 1,000 bookings by 91 different drivers, and then again, that's through a couple weeks ago. Key wins for us was we had all the major food delivery companies sign up. Plus, in addition, we got Fedex Ground to sign up, which took quite a bit of work. They are our probably busiest and most active person, so that was great. And then we had Elsco, who is our actually biggest customer right now, and they do a lot of uniforms and things like that for the restaurants in town. So we did extremely well. The only fleets that we're really missing at this stage is Fedex Express and UPS. So the reason I did all this was to collect data. I'm a data freak. I've used a lot of data to make the appropriate decisions and sell to my city council when I'm trying to raise prices or change what we do. So the data was key for us. So this is the progression by week of signups. And you can see how from the November 2nd on through December 14th, it's a perfect curve sliding up as people started using it and started being active. They continued to sign up and tell their friends to do that. We did have citations begin on November 30th. We didn't want to be overly handed. So we did do 3 months of warning or 3 weeks of warnings before we started writing actual tickets. We are using $30 tickets, just so you're aware. Mistake we made is we probably should have started writing tickets a little busier. You can see that the December 21st and 28th, it's a little bit slower, but that's because the holiday was there and they had free parking on those holiday days. And then COVID, I think, continued to keep January down a little bit for us. And we did go to red for a couple of weeks in Pickens County, which slowed restaurants down quite a bit, but we've seen a big increase. We had our biggest week of signups and people signing in last week, oddly enough. So again, I wanted the data to make decisions so we could really figure what was going on. There were some big surprises here. So you can see these bookings by hour. We are big from 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. as 1 p.m., which we would have expected. So it's pretty much a curve as we would have thought. 62% of our bookings are before noon. I went in with this hoping that I could get all of the trucks out of here by noon every day and tell people you can come from 7 to noon, and by noon, I don't want any deliveries in town. The data tells me that would not be possible. So that idea went out the window. But dwell time is very interesting to me, and I had no idea of this. 7 a.m. is when we start charging for these smart loading zones and alleyways. And you can see at 7 a.m. that we have these people are booking for over an hour. And then as the day progresses, it keeps going down a little bit each time until we're down to 15 minutes. I had no idea that the curve looked like that, and that the people that come earlier book for much longer at times, and the people that come later in the day book for shorter time. So that's information we're going to use to make changes on the way that we manage loading zones. Total bookings by zone. So one of the things that's happened here, I drove Coord crazy with as I started getting data. I kept asking for more information, and they were great at putting the data together for us to make decisions. So that you can see here that you can see how by hour the different zones, how they get used. So if you look at the green zone, which happens to be by the Ute Mountaineer, which is my most busiest zone, you can see that 10 o'clock, that's when it's the busiest. And then it's busy at 11, slower at noon, busy again at 1, relatively busy at 2. That's when UPS or FedEx ground comes, and then a little bit slower as we move on. So we looked at each one of these zones, and that allows us to make different decisions as we move forward. As far as booking by day, I had no idea that it looked like this. Tuesday is by far my busiest day. That makes a little bit sense as people are filling their shelves back in after the weekend. Thursday and Friday are busy as you'd expect as we're filling businesses back up for the weekend. But you can see that Wednesday is slow. And about 2 weeks ago, it was considerably slower than this. It was about 50% of what Tuesday was. So one of the first things that we've talked about with the fleets is on Tuesdays, we actually may have extra loading zones that are only loading zones on Tuesday. And then on Wednesdays, there may be some loading zones that are not loading zones on Wednesdays. So in the afternoons, I have places for my tourists and my citizens to park without any problem. So again, I think this was a great thing to learn for us. And our top 2 zones are over 30% of our bookings, and the alleyways represent over 34% of our total bookings, which is a surprise to both Coord and I. So we're going to continue to be looking at loading zones or at alleyways moving forward. And then as far as how long people were booking, Again, as I showed you earlier, that the earlier people come, the longer they stay. Um, Again, a surprise for us. But then as far as our average dwell time is 35 minutes. And again, that goes over an hour early, goes to 15 minutes later, but our average dwell time is 35 minutes. We thought it would be about 30 minutes, so that's on track. 25% of the bookings are for 15 minutes, 27% are for 30 minutes, 15% for 45, 18% for 60, and 15% for over 60 minutes. And 11% of the drivers did extend their time. So we're working on some plans that make it easier for the drivers to book in and out, because we don't want them to pay for any time that they're not using. Then what have we learned so far? Site selection is important. Again, we'd recommend that you pick your busiest loading zones. We could handle it without any problem. It made the truckers happy and made it easier for us. Again, I charged the fees at the beginning, and we'll continue to look at fees because I think it got the truckers engaged and got them to sign in and out, so I could understand what the alleyways look at, how they work, and what the data tells me. Outreach should start early if you do an event like this, and you should never stop. We still are doing outreach to this day. We did have a street team the first week that was friends of employees that work for me that went out there and talked to the drivers the first week, which helped get signups and get things moving really well. We thought that was, again, really helped get everybody on board. We do recommend, if you did this again, that you would do a 1 or 2 week preseason where you would have people using the Coord app and signing in, and we'd be looking at them, but have no enforcement, so that everybody, we got the learning curve taken care of early in the process. As I said before, we did 3 weeks of warnings. That was too much. 2 weeks works better and got us people moving faster. And we found out that unless you're UPS and FedEx, the tickets make a difference. And the ticket got my phone call, my phone ringing, with the fleet managers calling, and the deal I made with them, if you sign up today, then I'll be happy to take your ticket back. And that got a lot of them to sign up, which again, I think made everybody feel good as a give and take. Fleet onboarding is the most important thing to get these fleets on. Again, I think we have 80 to 85% of the fleet signed up for us. You have to be flexible and understanding as you talk to these drivers and the fleets. They all have unique situations, and I think it's important to take that into account. And Coord and I have made at least 5 or 6 different changes to satisfy these people. One of those was that they'd rather have monthly billings than billing every time they go, because they get 5 or 6 different bills from one day, which makes it difficult for them. So we're putting that in place. And you have to listen to the small guys. Their issues are totally different than the big ones. And by listening to them, we got them on board and actually very supportive of the program that we're doing. And then lastly, what's next? We did extend the pilot because again, it was very successful for us. We want to keep moving forward that. We are going to add in the month of March 2 additional loading zones and 3 additional alleyways. So we're going to go to the next level. We did take some feedback from the truckers and the drivers to understand what those zones should be, and we came to a meeting of the minds. We are going to modify some of the zones. The 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. zones seem to be liked a lot by the truckers, so it's important for them to have those. So that's why we're doing more 7 to 11 a.m. In addition, we'll make other changes before the summer. Like I said, maybe having less loading zones on Wednesday and more on Tuesdays. In addition, we continue to reach out to drivers and to fleets to get their feedback. We had a meeting last week with the fleets and learned a lot, and we're continuing to do that. And we're going to continue to grow the camera-based evaluation. We did do cameras again in December and saw that things got quite a bit better. So I have proof to my city council and to my engineers that actually the alleyways are now safer and they flow better. And we probably will do cameras again in the month of July. So we're really happy and open to any questions people may have on data and the reality of pulling one of these off.
Thanks, Mitch. And just to kind of tie things up at the end, you know, stepping back from, I think our amazing case study with Aspen, what's kind of next in general? We're continuing to operate pilots in our first 4 cities. We'll launch some more cities in the coming year, and really doing a lot of updates to this technology in response to this real city and driver feedback we're getting, because this is in the field. That includes increasing automation for drivers to minimize the amount of interaction with the app that they need to have to use smart zones. Another piece is really integration. This all becomes much easier once accessing and monitoring curb space is integrated into the city and fleet technology that people are already using for navigation and dispatching and enforcement. And of course, goods loading isn't the only curb management challenge. So we and others in the industry will explore more features and use cases, things like variable pricing, serving other business users of the curb, like charter buses, mobile vending. And I hope you'll excuse a minor plug, but we have our Digital Curb Challenge 2021 application process is open through Monday the 15th. This is the program that introduced us to Mitch and his team. It's an opportunity for up to 3 cities or other curb managers to partner with us to do a curb management pilot at no charge. And we hope maybe someone in this audience might be interested in working with us to continue really building out this practice and learning and sharing what we figure out through these real on the ground deployments. So thanks again for tuning in, and we're looking forward to questions and feedback and all that. This is where you can find Mitch and me.
Great, thank you guys for your presentations. We've got some questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to start reading some of those out. And audience, feel free to keep putting questions. We've got a few minutes to talk here. So first, for Matt, is there any worry about light vehicles using or parking on sidewalks, blocking accessible pedestrian paths?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. That's when we're looking at the policy piece of this, and this is also related to us looking at mopeds and e-bikes in the city, and needing to define those. Right now, the state of Massachusetts does not have a legal definition around e-bikes, and this would fall into e-cargo bikes as well. So they're in limbo of where they get defined, but we're hoping that happens this year. But so in areas that have the curb space, the sidewalk space, looking at having that 5 to 8 foot clear path for pedestrians, we could see potential for, parking areas for cargo bikes. Unfortunately, a lot of our downtown areas where these would be, if we did a business improvement district pilot program, there are a lot of very wide sidewalks that could work for this purpose.
Great, thanks. The next one is for Mitch and Dawn. So how do you get companies to sign up to the program? You said Fedex was hardest to get to join, so we're wondering what was the most persuasive arguments you were using to get their support?
I'll take the shot at that first. So 2 ways with most of them. Certainly with Fedex, the tact I took was that I'm going to use all this data that we collect over the next 3 months, which is now going to be 6 months, to make decisions on what we're going to do with loading zones. Again, FedEx Ground is probably one of my most active trucks. And I said, if you're not part of the program, your data is not going to be part of the decisions we make, and you actually may become less efficient in town because I may end up eliminating a loading zone that you use all the time or something like that. So that got them on board. And then I said before, as we started writing tickets, that made the phone ring. And when I told people that I would take the tickets back if they signed up on the same day, that got them motivated also. And the smaller companies really felt that we could make it more efficient for them by managing what we were doing, and therefore they could get in and out of town faster. Remember, I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere, so the majority of our big truckers are driving 4 hours to get here and 4 hours to get home. They come from Denver, so they want to get in town as fast as possible. So I think that's why they signed up.
Great, Dawn. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but yeah, Mitch, it sounds like you're not just focusing on the big guys, but you're also listening to smaller groups and sort of their want to vie for curbs. So that's a really good approach. Going back to Matt, you had mentioned delivery drivers valued proximity to destination. Did you take data or surveys to determine how sensitive they were to that? So is there any data to support that?
Yes, there is. I was just sort of trying to dig it up. So this comes from work we did for our transportation demand management program, looking at ways that large developments can mitigate impacts. And so one of the things that came out of it is not only proximity to the space, but also the time it takes for someone to deliver a parcel once they enter a building. And so that's one of the impacts that can be mitigated is to install a either a locker or a freight receiving room on the first floor, rather than having to go to each unit. So we also have data that was collected by another fellow who was doing a lot of the analysis on of the ticket data downtown. Sorry. But yes, we have it. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but if it's anyone wanted to it, I could probably find it and share it with you.
And just to add on, we've been interviewing drivers, asking many of these same questions to learn more about kind of what their key criteria are. And it seems like there's just a lot of variety in that location sensitivity. One very vivid example was a person who delivers a lot of very high-end wine and alcohol. He really wanted to minimize, it was very important for him to minimize the amount of travel he had to do with that breakable good. So he's someone who the location proximity was very important. In contrast, we spoke with somebody who delivers linens, and that person was less sensitive and would actually use a loading zone and then stay in the same spot while he went to maybe 5 different customers, just because of the nature of what he was delivering. And so I think that's really interesting because it does feed into this possibility I was mentioning in theory of, having prime and less prime locations, and the people who are less location sensitive can, pay less by using something that's another block away or maybe located behind a building. Whereas the people who really care about being right out front pay a little more for that. So I think there's potential to take advantage of the differences in that sensitivity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if I could jump back in, Dawn, that's a good point, because thinking back to the sort of breakdown in different types of commercial demand, you have the parcel deliveries, the traditional bev food deliveries. It's really the on-demand services that want that quick access. And since those are increasing so dramatically, it's those that need to consider how we get them as close to the destination as possible in order to meet that demand, without them blocking a bike lane or a bus lane or a travel lane.
Another question for Matt, in reference to the chart you showed about parking fees. Has the city considered any progressive penalties? The more times you break a rule, the higher the fee each time, or anything like that?
I am not an expert on our parking fines, but I'm not aware of anything that's been considered in that regard. I know we do have different penalties depending upon zones. Like if you're in a downtown zone, it's a different penalty than say out in a residential area. I did see a question about the kind of batched payments, the monthly payments that folks part of our fleet program pay, and that's really more of an ease of a process ease for the company and for the city. So we're not having to address every single individual ticket that they get issued. It's just more that they can make that batch payment. I have my own personal opinions about whether this is incentivizing or discouraging bad behavior. But that's a good idea, though, to have sort of ever increasing penalties for continued violations.
Yeah, I'll throw my 2 cents in on that we're looking at doing progressive penalties, because, like everything else, 20% of my locals are 80% of my tickets. And if it's always a $30 ticket or a $50 ticket, it doesn't change behavior. But if all of a sudden that ticket went from $30 to 60 to 90 to $120, I could look him in the eye and said, hey, it was a $30 ticket. You made it a $120 ticket by doing the same mistake over and over and over again. So there are a fair amount of cities that are moving to progressive fines because it's the only way to change behavior. You can't make the ticket, other than an ADA ticket and a fire hydrant, you can't make the tickets high enough to change behavior for most people.
Right, yeah. This question might be applicable to both or all three panelists here, but I think this is very timely given that a lot of us are dealing with snow in our streets. For cities participating in smart zones that are in cold climates, is snow removal a priority for these zones?
Yeah,
Mitch, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So yes, we talked to the streets department in advance. And again, we get snow on a regular basis. It's supposed to snow here for the next 7 days straight. So we did talk to our streets department to make sure that the loading zones get plowed before 7 a.m. in the morning, which they've been really good at doing it. And then just so you're aware, we just had a couple issues with some of our EV charging stations. So now we put that on their priority list to make sure that. So for them now it's loading zones, handicap spots, and EV stations. So they've been great at helping us do that. We do a lot of our plowing from midnight to 7 a.m. so they can get it done when there's no cars on their way.
Great. A quick question for Matt. I don't think Boston uses Coord. What is the app that you use? Someone's asking about that.
Yeah, we actually do work with Coord. We've been using them to just gather asset data on the curb and regulations. So we've been working with them for a while now because we don't have a base map of all the regulations and sign assets at the curb. So yeah, so it's been great working with them and getting that data, because having that knowledge is essential to being able to make good curb decisions. And we've talked a good bit about the smart zones opportunity. It's just we always get held up at enforcement, which holds us up on a lot of things. I think I'm in a union, we're a union shop, and so our enforcement division's in a union too. So that presents a few challenges to making adjustments to the way things are done. That's just not for Coord, it's also for if we put in a different sign regulation and they have to approach it differently. Just presents its own challenges.
Great. This is for Mitch, and I think you may have touched on part of this earlier, but someone's asking, what did you find was the most efficient way to stay in communication with the many different commercial operators and drivers?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that the communication with the drivers was relatively easy because we see them every day. And I think, as Matt said, enforcement's important. What's been unique to us is that we're now hyper-focused on loading zones, not only on the ones that are smart loading zones, but all of them. So again, we've communicated by giving flyers to them or information to the drivers to take back. Plus, as the fleets have signed up, we get their email addresses and we continue to communicate with them that way. As I said, we had a meeting with all the fleets, a Zoom meeting last Thursday, and then Dawn and I are just putting together a survey question, a bunch of questions to send to these fleets to go ahead and get some more information as we learn from our conversation. So again, it's easy because we see them every day, so we talk to the drivers and we hope they communicate back to the fleets in addition.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I talked to a lot of cities and some have like commercial vehicle like permitting programs. So they have somewhat of like a database of fleets, but some cities really don't. And so, often we find, when we're putting this together, we build that database. And then as cities sign on, now all of a sudden, like we and the city have the ability to contact, whatever we're up to, 80–85% of their fleets. And we get contact information for the drivers who sign up as well. And, you're not going to spam people, but you are able to communicate to them and let them know, like, there's some new zones opening up, or, we want to hear from you on this thing. And it can create this communication channel that really didn't exist in some cities, which I imagine is helpful for other kind of policy development that maybe isn't your loading zones, but something else that you need to be in touch with this big user of street and curb space that can sometimes be a little bit like decentralized and squirrely to track down.
Definitely, yeah. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question, and then I'll pass it over to Becky to wrap things up. I think this one's for Matt, but if Mitch and Don have anything to say too, feel free. The point you made about how a freight or loading room in a large building cuts down on delivery time and curb use was a good point. Are there any other site building requirements that planners can implement to make delivery or curb use more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as possible, having deliveries happen off site. So we're deliveries, you know, having, you know, the first floor freight delivery rooms, building into the site design of where these deliveries are going to happen, and be thinking about that, not just for parcel goods, but also for passenger loading and drop off. Yeah, so I think that it should be a consideration of developments, that it's a big part of the development. I don't know if Dawn or Mitch, if you have any thoughts on that.
I guess the thing I would add is just, you know, there's certain places where, you know, something, you know, where more involving more technology is probably needed to manage a more complex or environment. But sometimes I think it's a kind like a simpler like geometry problem. Like I think a lot of our residential streets just don't have loading space. That's certainly the case in New York. And so New York City's been rolling out like a very simple low tech program, which is just like make a loading zone like on a block extending on either side of a fire hydrant so that there's more space there, because we have so many more deliveries taking place on residential areas. It's not the same in and out that you get on a commercial like mixed use block, but I think just our curbs haven't quite kept up with some of these changes. So so that's kind of a program that was successful in New York, and they're building on it. That's really, you know, you might get a few people complaining that there's a few fewer parking spaces during the day. But besides that, it's a fairly straightforward way, if you've got a narrow street, to get some of those vehicles to pull over and not block it. So sometimes, you know, there's a regulatory low tech solution, you know.
Thanks, Don. And thank you, Mitch and Matt, for participating. I'll pass it over to Becky and she can close it out.
Great. Thank you so much. I can't tell you just how interesting it's been to talk to all of our presenters just over the last couple of weeks as we talked about this particular session. And I keep on thinking about the lessons that I'm learning that have applicability to other kind of new modes as well. You know, usually I think about pricing being the real way to manage demand, but definitely talking to Mitch and Matt and really thinking about data as being another, you know, just incredibly powerful tool that's being used successfully in communities, both big and small. So, you know, it's just so fun to hear everyone speak. If you're interested in more of these types of topics, then I would encourage you to go and attend the Urbanism Next virtual forum, which will be on March 17th through 19th. So it's coming up almost a month away. You can go to urbanismnext.org to find out more. We've got our full schedule up there. And you can also register. Early bird registration ends next week on the 16th of February. So please do go and check it out. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and asking great questions, and our presenters. And we look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thank you very much.